The fire was out before I opened my eyes, and that was the first wrong thing. My brother always kept it fed through the night, even in September, even in the high desert, where the days still ran hot enough to blister the back of your neck. I lay there under the wagon canvas we'd been using as a second blanket, and listened for the sounds a grading camp makes before light. The mules stamping, a Chinese cook banging a pot, somebody's cough down the line of tents. There was nothing, just wind moving grit against the canvas, and the particular silence of a place that has emptied out. I woke him by kicking the sole of his boot. He came up fast, the way he always did, hand already reaching for where the axe should have been, and then he stopped and looked past me at the flat where the camp had stood the evening before. Gone. All of it. The grading crew's tents, the supply wagons, the 2 Studebaker freight wagons the company used to haul ballast, the mule string, the surveyor's tripod that had stood in the same spot for 11 days, all of it pulled out sometime in the night, without either of us hearing so much as a wheel creak. We stood there a long while, not saying anything. That was the 8th of the month, no. The 13th, a Wednesday. I remember because I'd been marking the days in the back of the trail journal, same as always, and I flipped it open right then with my hands not steady, and wrote the date down before I wrote anything else, like fixing it to paper would make it make more sense. It didn't. What was left? Our own bedrolls, the tin cup, the hand axe, 40 feet of picket rope nobody had bothered to reclaim, and 2 burlap sacks of hardtack and salt pork that some foreman, maybe out of guilt, maybe just forgetting we existed until the last minute, had left stacked by the cold fire ring. My brother crouched down and went through them with the flat patience he brought to everything, counting out loud. 2 days. 2 days of rations for 2 men, if we didn't eat much, and didn't lose any of it to the ravens working the ridge above camp. The Central Pacific grading crew had been due east of us, laying track toward a junction that didn't exist yet, on any map either of us had seen. We were graders' sons, hired at Winnemucca for $4 a week, and our keep. And apparently our keep had run out sometime in the night, along with everyone who might have told us why. There was a spur, though, off to the north, a line of rail already laid and never used, rust-bright in the early sun, running off toward a stretch of country the survey crews had marked only as unorganized territory. My brother stood, slung the rope over his shoulder, and looked at it a long moment. "Well," he said, "somebody built that far. Might as well see what they built it toward." We'd walked 11 days to reach that camp, out from Winnemucca along the Humboldt, and then north where the grade cut away from the river, toward drier ground. And when we came up over the last rise and saw the tents and the rail ends catching the light, my brother had stopped and said only, "There it is," the way a man says something he's decided not to feel too much about. We were down to $9 between us then. Our father's Colt revolving rifle wrapped in a wool blanket that had been his too, an axe with a chipped bit, 2 blankets, a coffee pot with a dent in the side, from a fall down some slope in the Ruby Mountains 3 winters back. That was the whole of what we owned, plus each other, plus the debt. The debt was this. Our father had died owing $40 to a freighter in Elko for a mule that broke its leg in a wash and had to be shot before it ever pulled a load, and though the freighter never came looking, my brother had decided we'd pay it anyway, someday, when we had it. He didn't talk about our father much otherwise. 2 years dead of a fever that came on fast in July and took him in 11 days, and after that it had been the 2 of us on the road, working where work was, and my brother had made only the one rule I ever heard him say plain: we don't leave a debt sitting. Not to a man, not to a camp, not to God if it came to that. I was younger by 4 years and had never once heard him break it. At the grading camp, they'd put us on water detail first, hauling from a spring 2 miles off in barrels lashed to a hand-pulled sledge, because we were young and quick and nobody trusted us yet with a sledgehammer near their own feet. $4 a week each, our keep included. which meant beans and hardtack and whatever the cook shot off the ridges. We slept in a tent with 6 other boys, mostly Irish, one Chinese man who kept to himself and spoke better English than any of them when he chose to. And we learned the rhythm of it, the 6 o'clock bell, the noon bell, the long stretch of afternoon where the rails went down foot by foot under a sun that didn't care how far from anywhere we were. Nobody had said the crew was pulling out. Nobody had said anything at all, near as we could tell, and that not saying sat wrong with my brother in a way I recognized, because it was the same look he'd had standing over our father's grave, working out what was owed, and to whom, and how a man went about collecting it from country that didn't keep books. He turned from the spur line now and looked back at me. "We eat half rations," he said, "and we walk till we find who owns that track." I got out the map myself then, the one we'd bought off a peddler in Elko for 75 cents, folded soft as cloth from handling, and spread it on a flat rock, while my brother crouched over my shoulder. The Central Pacific line ran clean and black across the paper, Humboldt Wells to Argenta to the sink country beyond, every siding and water tank marked with a foreman's careful hand. There was no spur. I traced my finger along where we stood, out past the last stake the surveying crew had driven, and there was nothing there but empty paper, the kind of blank a mapmaker leaves when he's never been somewhere and won't pretend otherwise. "Could be an old spur," I said. "Mining road. Something they built before the main line and never finished." "Could be." He wasn't looking at the map anymore. He was looking south, where the rails went rust-colored and narrow into the hills, ties half buried in sand and sage, some of them cracked through and sunk at angles no track gang would allow. "Main line's 40 miles east, near as the foreman said. No water between here and there that anyone's marked. We walk that way and we're guessing same as we'd be guessing walking this way." I didn't like either guess. 40 miles was 4 days on foot with the water we carried. Less if the heat held, and I'd seen what heat like this did to a man's tongue by the 3rd day. But an unmarked track spur running into hills that weren't on any survey, that was its own kind of thirst. The kind that gets a man killed for curiosity's sake rather than hunger. "Company track," I said. "Somebody laid this. Somebody's got to be at the other end of it. Or somebody was." He straightened up, and I watched him do what he always did before deciding anything, which was to look at the sky first, gauge the sun, same as our father used to, though our father had never needed a sky like this one to tell him anything. Rails don't get laid and then get left, unless the reason for laying them stopped being a good reason. Question is whether we want to be the ones who find out why. Neither of us said the other thing, which was that a crew doesn't pull out silent in the night on boys who trusted them for $4 a week and their keep, unless leaving quiet was safer for the company than leaving loud. I folded the map back along its creases and put it away, and my brother hitched his pack higher on his shoulders, and neither of us moved toward the east yet, toward the known miles and the known thirst. "South," he said finally, like it cost him something to say it. "We follow rail. Rail always leads somewhere a man built for a reason." We turned south along the spur before either of us said another word about it, because saying more would have meant admitting we'd already decided, and my brother liked to let a decision sit a minute before he owned it out loud. I did the counting instead, since counting was mine to do. 2 days of food between us, a sack of cornmeal gone hard at the bottom, 4 strips of jerked beef wrapped in oilcloth, a paper twist of coffee not big enough to fill a man's 2 hands, and the last of the beans we'd bought off the camp cook for 6 bits, before he pulled out with the rest. I laid it out on a flat rock that Thursday morning, the 22nd of July, and my brother watched me do it without saying anything, and when I was done, he said, "Half rations starting now," and that was the whole conversation. The rail told its own story if you knew to read it, and my brother did, better than I did, on account of the 2 seasons he'd spent laying track for the Central Pacific before I was old enough to be let on a crew at all. He crouched at the first tie past where the spur forked and ran his thumb along a spike head, gone the color of dried blood, scaled over with rust, so thick it had lost its shape entirely. No hexagon left to it, no edge. "This iron's old," he said. "Older than anything back at camp. 5 years, maybe more." The ties under it had gone soft with rot, and where the sun had gotten at them, the wood had silvered and split along the grain. And in 2 places the tie had crumbled clean through, so the rail sat on nothing but the ballast beneath it, floating an inch above ground that had shifted out from under it years before. Ants had built through one. A tuft of bunchgrass had rooted itself between 2 spikes, like the rail was just another rock to grow around. "Whoever laid this wasn't laying it for the same outfit that's laying track now," I said, and my brother nodded, like I'd caught up to something he'd already settled in his own head a mile back. We walked it anyway. The land dropped by degrees into a shallow basin ringed with low reddish bluffs, sage going gray-green in the morning light, and the heat hadn't come up yet, so our shadows still ran long and thin ahead of us on the ties, stepping from one to the next, the way we'd done since we were boys small enough that our father had to shorten his stride to match ours. Neither of us spoke of thirst yet. There was water enough in the 2 canteens for 2 days if we were careful, and my brother was always careful the way our father had been careful. Right up until the winter he wasn't. I kept my eyes on the rail ahead of us, on the rust and the rot and the sage crowding in close on either side. And somewhere past the second bluff the ties began to look tended again, the rust a little less, the wood a little sounder, like we were walking backward into a year, when someone still cared whether the track held. We made maybe 7 miles that first day past the second bluff, and camped where a shelf of rock broke the wind coming down off the higher country to the north. My brother built the fire small, the way he always did, feeding it in pieces no bigger than a finger, and we ate a strip of dried beef each, and half a biscuit gone hard enough to crack a tooth on. Neither of us said the food was short. We both knew the count in the packs, same as we knew our own names, and there wasn't sense in saying a true thing twice. The night came down cold in a way the desert has that a man raised anywhere else doesn't expect. The heat, bleeding straight up off the ground, into a sky gone black, and crowded with more stars than I'd ever counted, and I lay with my coat over both of us, and listened to my brother's breathing go slow, and even while my own stayed shallow, a long while yet. Coyotes somewhere off to the west, the rail ticking as it cooled, a sound like something settling into a decision. Second day we made better time, 9 miles by my brother's count, which he kept by watching the sun, and the shadow of a stick he'd whittled flat on one side, and marked with a knife. The ties were sounder here, like I'd noticed, but the country around them had gone harder. Less sage, more bare red dirt, the bluffs pulling back on either side into a wider basin that put me in mind of a bowl a man could get lost walking the bottom of and never find the rim again. My feet had gone past hurting into something duller, a kind of far-off ache I could set aside if I didn't think on it. It was near the end of that second day, the light going long and orange and low, that I saw the shoe. It lay half in the ballast beside the rail, leather gone stiff and cracked and the color of the dirt around it, small enough to fit in 2 cupped hands, a child's shoe, buttons still on one side, though the buttons had rusted through to threads of color, and it sat there like it had simply been set down and forgotten rather than lost. My brother crouched and looked at it a long moment without touching it, the way he'd look at a trap he didn't trust, and then he stood again without a word and kept walking, and I understood I was meant to do the same, though I looked back at it twice before the dark and the distance took it, small and pale against all that red ground, and I carried the sight of it a long way further than my feet carried me that evening. We camped that night in a shallow wash off the grade. No fire, my brother said. Not yet. Not till we knew what kind of country we'd walked into. And I lay against my pack with my hat over my eyes, and did not sleep so much as pass through the hours in pieces. By the time the sky grayed, we were up and moving again, and it was maybe 2 miles on, the rail bed climbing at last after 2 days of running flat and true across the basin, that we came up over a low ridge of cracked shale and stopped, both of us, without either saying to stop. Below us, the land folded down into a shallow bowl, and in the bowl sat a town. I counted the buildings twice to be sure of the number, the way you count a thing you don't quite believe. 11. A long, low structure that had the look of a depot, its roofline broken in one place, where the boards had given to weather. A row of smaller buildings behind it, square and plain, the kind thrown up fast by men who meant to stay only a season and then didn't leave. A church with no steeple bell that I could see from that distance, just a square tower standing empty against the sky. Further back, past what might have been a store, the ground rose again into a scatter of smaller shapes. I took it first for boulders, and then understood, from the regular spacing of them, to be graves. No smoke stood over any chimney. No dog barked, no rooster called. No voice carried up to us on the wind the way sound does in that kind of quiet morning air, sharp and thin and traveling far. The doors I could see were closed, most of them, shut tight against something, and one hung open on a single hinge, swinging so slow in the small breeze that it took me a full minute of watching to be sure it moved at all. My brother didn't move for a long while. He had his hand up, shading his eyes, though the sun wasn't yet high enough to trouble him, and I understood he was doing what he always did before a thing, taking its measure before he'd let his feet commit to it. "There's no such town on the survey," he said finally. "Not on the company map. Not on the territorial one either. I've looked at both, close enough to know." I asked him how a town of 11 buildings and a graveyard could sit unrecorded, not 40 miles from track the Central Pacific itself had laid. He didn't answer that. He only settled his pack higher on his shoulders, the way he did when he'd decided something and didn't care to discuss the deciding of it, and started down the grade toward the silence below us, and after a moment, because there was nothing else in that country to do, and no one else in it to do it with, I followed him down. The general store still had its sign up, the paint gone to chalk, letters I could just make out, mercantile, and under it, a smaller word I couldn't recover no matter how I tilted my head to the light. The door wasn't locked. It wasn't even latched. It came open on a push, and a smell rolled out at us like something exhaled. Dust and old cloth, and a sweetness underneath that I didn't want to name. Inside, the shelves still held goods. Tins of what had been peaches, the labels long since eaten by damp and gone to brown paper. A bolt of calico folded on the counter like the storekeep meant to cut it that afternoon. A ledger book lying open beside a set of brass scales, the pages curled stiff, and my brother didn't touch it, not yet. Only looked at it the way he looked at the door hinge, like it needed measuring before it needed handling. We went into the first house after that. Small place, 1 room and a loft, and on the table 2 plates set with what might once have been beans, dried now to a black crust, and 2 forks laid beside them, and a 3rd plate pushed to the side, like somebody had been expected and hadn't come. A woman's shawl hung on a peg by the door. A child's boot, just the one, sat under a chair. My brother stood in the doorway a long time before he went in, and when he did, he moved slow, the way a man moves in a church he isn't sure he's welcome in. The second house was worse for being neater. Bed made, a wash basin with water, long evaporated to a ring of gray silt. A calendar nailed to the wall by the stove, one of those paper ones from a mercantile supply house. Each month its own page, and someone had been tearing them off week by week the way people do, marking days gone. It stopped at December. The last torn edge sat just above a page that read 1869, and below that a scrap of the following week, still clinging, half torn, like whoever had been keeping that calendar had reached for it one more time and not finished the tearing. I stood looking at that longer than I should have. 40 miles of empty railbed behind us, 11 buildings ahead of us and around us, and a woman's shawl on a peg, like she'd only stepped out to the well. My brother said nothing about the calendar. He wrote something down in our own book, a few words, the date and the count of houses, the way he always did, careful and unhurried, like the numbers themselves might hold together if he set them down right. Then he closed his book and looked toward the far end of the street, where a taller building stood apart from the rest, with a bell shape at its roofline, and he said, "We'll want to see that one before dark." We didn't reach the tall building before dark after all. Between it and where we stood sat a smaller structure with a cross nailed crooked above the door, boards gone gray, and split from 30 winters of sun and frost, and behind it, low humps in the ground that I took at first for drifted sand, until I saw the wood standing up out of them. Grave markers. 11 of them close together, then more scattered wider, some leaning so far they'd near touched the dirt, some fallen flat and half buried. My brother crouched at the nearest and brushed the grit off with the flat of his hand, slow, the way he'd clean a rifle breech. A name showed under his palm, Martha J. Cole, and below it cut smaller, like whoever carved it had run short of room or short of strength. FEB 18069. We counted as we went. 31 markers with names still legible, names like Aldous Fenn and the Pruitt boy, no more than 9 years by the marker's reckoning, and R. Dunstan, AGE 61, and then simply baby, no other word. 10 more markers stood blank, wood too weathered, or never carved at all, and I thought about that longer than I wanted to. A settlement small enough that everyone knew every name, and still some men buried their own without bothering to cut them into the wood, because there wasn't strength left for the carving, or because by then there was no one left who'd known them well enough to spell it right. 41, my brother said when he'd finished his second count to check the first. He didn't say it like a discovery. He said it flat, the way he read weight off a scale. None of the ground showed sign of fire or fight. No char, no shot marks in the boards. Nothing broken that I could find. Just the dates, clustered tight through January and February and into March. A graveyard filled in over 10 or 11 weeks and then gone quiet. Like whatever had been taking these people had run its course by finding nothing left to take. I said as much. My brother nodded slow, still looking at the markers, and said that a fever moves through a camp like this in days. Takes what it takes, and then it's done. But 41 people don't die in 10 weeks from a fever, unless something else was already working on them first. Cold works slow. Hunger works slower still. He said it without any heat in his voice, just laying the fact down next to the others, the way he'd laid down the shawl on the peg, and the torn calendar, and the count of houses, building towards something he wasn't ready to say outright yet. He stood, brushed the dirt from his knees, and looked again toward that tall building at the street's end, the bell-shaped dark against the last gray light. We walked to it together, boots loud on frozen boards where the street had once been. The building stood taller than the rest, 2 stories where everything else was 1. A bell tower framed above the roofline with the bell still hung in it, black against a sky going the color of a knife blade. A signboard hung crooked over the door, the paint gone to ghost letters I couldn't read anymore. The door itself was shut tight, and when my brother put his shoulder to it, it didn't give an inch. Barred from inside, he said. He'd found the gap at the jamb, thin as a knife's width, and through it, the shadow of a plank laid crossways behind the wood. We went round to the window on the north side, boarded over but the boards gone soft with 30-odd years of weather. It took both of us maybe a quarter hour, working the hand axe into the seams, prying loose one board and then the next, until there was a hole big enough for a man to fold himself through. My brother went first. I heard him land inside, heard him breathing in the dark, and then his voice telling me to come on. Inside it smelled like a cellar that had never once had its door opened. Dust so old it had stopped being dust, and turned into something like felt on every surface. There was a stove, cold 30 years, a stool overturned by nothing I could see, and a desk against the far wall with a lamp still sitting on it, the oil long since dried to nothing in the base. On the desk, a ledger, bound in leather gone stiff as bark, and beside it, sitting square and deliberate, the way a man sets down something he means to protect, a strongbox with a company seal stamped into its lid, Central Pacific Railroad, and beneath that, smaller, payroll. My brother didn't touch the box first. He opened the ledger. The handwriting was small, careful, a man's hand trained to write numbers all his life, and forced, near the end, to write something else. The first pages were freight counts and passenger tallies, ordinary as any station's books. Then, dated late in November of 1869, the entries changed. A rock slide had taken the eastern grade, he'd written, cutting the spur off from the main line entire. Then, 3 weeks later, in a hand gone tighter, more pressed into the page, the first blizzard, the one that didn't break for 11 days. He'd written on the 4th of December that he had wired the company at Reno requesting relief stores and had received, in return, only silence. My brother read that line twice. Then he looked up at me, and neither of us said anything, and outside the light went the last of the way out of the sky. He turned the page, and the paper had gone soft at the corner, worried thin by some other hand before ours, and I understood a dead man had read this same line over and over in the dark, the way you touch a sore tooth to know it's still there. The entries after the 4th of December came slower. Some days had only a line. Cattle feed give out the 9th. Widow Corse's boy took the fever the 12th. By Christmas the hand had changed again. Not shakier exactly, but smaller, as if he were trying to save the ink, or the paper, or himself. He recorded who died and on what day, no more than that. Name and date. The way he'd once recorded freight. I watched my brother's thumb move along the edge of the page without turning it. Back and forth. The way he'd rubbed the stock of the Henry when he was working out a problem the rifle had no part in. He didn't rub his eyes. He didn't set the ledger down. I noticed that. January thin to almost nothing. 3 entries in the whole month. And the last of them just a date and a single word, colder. Then February came, and there was 1 page left with writing on it, and my brother's hand went still on the paper altogether, flat over it, like he was holding it down against a wind that wasn't blowing. 3rd of February, 1870. The hand there was careful again, careful the way a man is careful when he's decided something and wants it read right. He'd written that the town was down to 9 souls, and himself, that he did not believe a train was coming, that he had considered walking out over the pass, and had decided against it, on account of the town's books being his to keep, and no one else left to keep them. He wrote that he would stay at his post. Those were his words. I stay at my post. There was no entry after that. My brother closed the ledger slow, the way you'd close a door on a room with somebody sleeping in it, and set it down on the strongbox, and for a long while he didn't move at all, and the wick in the lamp burned lower, and outside I heard the wind come up off the flat, the way it does before full dark, dragging grit against the depot boards, and somewhere behind us in the black township, the bell we hadn't yet gone up to see hung on its beam, waiting on whoever was left to ring it. "We ain't taking it," my brother said. And that was the whole of the debate, said to the lamp flame and the strongbox both, like he was informing them of a decision already settled somewhere else, in some room I hadn't been in. I didn't argue it. I want that understood. I'd thought the same thing myself, sitting there with the ledger shut, though I hadn't found the words yet, and he had. "We'll report it at Winnemucca," he said. "Whoever holds the county there, whoever the company's got standing for it. Let them send men out with a wagon and a proper count. It ain't ours to carry off." He said it plain, the way he says most things, no heat in it, and picked up our own trail book from his coat, the one he's kept since we left the grade. Pages soft now from handling, and he opened it to a clean leaf and took the stub of pencil from behind his ear and set to copying. 41 names. He read each one off the station master's ledger low, under his breath, like a man reading scripture he half believes, and won't disrespect either way, and wrote each one down in our book in his own hand, slower than I'd ever seen him write anything, careful with the spelling where the ink had run thin. I held the lamp for him. My arm went stiff from holding it steady, and I didn't say so. When he'd finished, he closed our book and closed the depot ledger too, and set his palm flat on the strongbox lid a moment. Not like a man saying goodbye to money, more like a man closing a coffin lid gentle so it don't bang. "Leave the strongbox here," he said, "locked how we found it. Let the county open it their own selves, in front of witnesses. That silver's got names on it, same as the ledger does." Then he stood and took up the lamp himself, and went to the door, and I followed him out into the black township, past the store with its shelves still stocked, past the church with its bell tower standing bare, out to the depot roof, where the bell hung on its beam, same as it had 30 years, cast iron gone dull with weather, Halden's siding cut into its shoulder plain as day. My brother reached up and took hold of the pull rope, old hemp gone stiff and pale, and looked at me once, not asking permission exactly, more giving me the chance to say a word if I had one. I didn't have one. He pulled it. The sound went out over that dead town and out over the flat beyond it, and didn't come back. No echo, nothing to catch it, just gone into the dark, like it had somewhere to be. We rode into Winnemucca 11 days later, dust to our knees, and found the county surveyor in a rented office above a feed store, a heavy-set man named Dunmore, who took our account down in his own hand and asked us twice, were we certain of the number 41. We were certain. He sent 2 men out with a wagon inside the week, and a month after that, a short notice ran in the Silver State newspaper about a strong box of Central Pacific payroll silver recovered from an abandoned siding, no mention of graves, no mention of names, the company's habit of silence following the town, even in its ending. We didn't correct it. Some things a newspaper isn't the place for. I carry the ledger now. My brother gave it over without much said, just set it in my saddlebag one morning outside Lovelock, and told me it rode better with me, since I was the one who'd first got the numbers to add right. 41 names, and I've read them enough nights by firelight that I could say them without the book, though I don't, because saying them from memory feels like claiming them as mine, and they aren't. They belong to whoever's left that might still be looking, if anyone is, after 30 years. We asked after Halden's siding at 3 more rail offices going west, showed the name to a station agent in Reno who'd worked the line since before the war. He shook his head slow, said he'd never heard of it, and I believed him. A company can make a town disappear easier than it can build one. No bodies to explain, no survey to correct. Just a spur pulled up and a name left off the next printing. The bell's the only thing that still says it was there. It rides wrapped in a wool blanket at the bottom of my brother's pack, and some evenings he takes it out and looks at the lettering like it might have changed since morning. We don't talk about it much beyond that. There isn't a lesson we're fixing to hand you, no moral we came to on purpose, just the 2 of us, a rifle, a hand axe, and now a ledger of names that never made it into any book but this one. That's what the high country does. It keeps its dead quiet unless somebody goes looking, and even then, it only gives up what it wants to. If you've got people you're keeping, a brother, a sister, somebody you'd walk a bad stretch of country for, hold on to that. It's worth more than any silver we found. And if your family's got a story like this one, a name that dropped off a map somewhere, we'd like to hear it. Leave it below. Subscribe if you want to walk the next stretch with us. There's more country ahead, and we mean to see all of it.